Are there behaviors that you notice in yourself that you might consider at this point to be pretty normal? So these are kind of reactions to things or just things that you do pretty consistently. But you have a feeling that they're not the healthiest behaviors or behaviors that you particularly want to keep having. So by behavior, I also mean reactions to things. To illustrate this and to kind of unpack it a little bit, I want to just explore two words, so normal and natural. So when we use the word normal, we have the word norm in there, which means that it's the norm, meaning that it is something that is decently repetitive, so statistically probable in a sense. And so to give you an analogy of what we can see as a difference between these two things is that, for example, if there is an animal in a zoo and it's within a certain square footage of enclosure, there are certain kinds of behaviors that become very normal for animals of a certain size and within certain enclosures to do, such as pace back and forth, as one example. Now, if you were to statistically look at the number of animals and the percentage of zoo animals that do this behavior, that would, in a sense, could be considered normal because there are enough of them doing that behavior that it's statistically probable that they will. Now, in a sense, within that enclosure, that behavior is adaptive because the animal doesn't really have a lot of other options to do, and there's certain needs that it has, like for exercise or whatever, that doing that behavior within that enclosure is not only normal but adaptive for its conditions. But those same behaviors are not necessarily the most natural for that animal. So I want to just compare this to our, first experiences where we are also in a sense of enclosure. This is our family system. And when we're little, we don't have a lot of options. We don't get to choose other family members. We don't get to choose a different home or community. So there's going to be certain behaviors that we have to navigate this enclosure, this system, that become normal because they become just what we do the most often, and in a sense they are also adaptive. But just like the caged animal, if it were to eventually go into the wild and into a more complex environment where there are not the same types of hierarchies and members that are there all the time, and there are many, many more options, the behavior of, for example, pacing back and forth would now not necessarily be adaptive, right? And it's also not normal compared to the population that it's surrounded by at that point, if it's in the wild. So the key word here that I want to just touch on, because we are complex adaptive systems as humans, our brains are this, our societies, our families, all that kind of stuff, is the word adaptive. So what can be adaptive in one environment is not necessarily adaptive in another environment. What makes something adaptive is if it gets updated according to new data, new scenarios, and it's able to do that all the time. What I see in myself, in clients, is that there are a lot of behaviors and reactions they have to things that were formed when they were little because they were in this environment, this enclosure, this system, that were adaptive, they became normal, but now are not necessarily adaptive for their current relationships. So I'm just going to leave you with one idea of how we can have the most updated information. And this is not an easy process. I'm talking about connecting a lot of dots and going into different layers, but I just want to leave you with this one simple, not easy, but simple concept that in order to have the most adaptive behavior, we need to update, and we need to be updating constantly in terms of what the conditions are now. The way to do that is to be as present as possible with the data as it is occurring now. And you'll see a theme in a lot of my videos. The issue that a lot of us have is that we basically have almost a film reel or a tape recorder that is influencing from our past. It's influencing how we perceive the present moment. And so we are kind of staying stuck in loops that come from this environment or enclosed environment, and we're filtering everything we have now through that. So it would be like this caged animal going into the wild, but still not updating that it's in a new environment and repeating a pacing back and forth. We're doing something very similar with our minds, with these narratives and these stories that are just basically cycling, having our past predict our future in a sense. So in order to be as present as possible, it's going to require all these different exercises and mind training that you keep hearing about. This idea of mindfulness and meditation is about training our awareness to be as steady as possible here so that we can receive data as it's happening, as it's emerging now. And through that, we get a chance to update some of these behaviors, some of these reactions, to become more adaptive now and more natural to us, because our nature, what's natural for a human, is to be constantly updating and evolving and allowing for new behaviors and responses to emerge according to new situations, not repeating the past. So I'm going to give you that today to just think about how can you be more steady and in the moment. And one way to just think about that is, how do I experience this moment without a narrative going? What is this moment actually like without a story? And just see what happens when you ask yourself that question. Thank you.